Leading people well is tough, even in the best of times. But what do we do when it gets really, really tough? How do we as leaders respond to adversity in a healthy and productive way? How can we continue to succeed in business and in life through the storms of leading well? You know, when dangerous storms begin to brew over the horizon, most herd animals and even humans have a tendency to take cover or move away from the storm, but not the buffalo. The buffalo, instead of running for cover, will gather its herd, take a few last bites of whatever food is out there, and head directly through the storm. As leaders, we have to do the same thing. We're all faced with different storms that come with leading well. Modern day leaders face leadership storms that can cripple an individual, a team, or an entire organization. Our guests are resilient leaders, some of the best resilient leaders our country has to offer. They'll walk us through how they actually got through these storms and how they became better on the other side. So join us on the Through the Storm podcast. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time of day it is. Thank you for joining the Through the Storm podcast. And I tell you what, my guest today has been through the storm, probably the toughest storm I've ever heard of. And not only has he made it out on the other side, but he helps people to make it through their storms. He helps people to pick up their herd and charge through their storms. He is an amazing friend. I think I've known him for 35 years, and I'm only 40 years old. So I've known this man for quite a long time. The Reverend Dr. Ted Wiard, he's a director of the Trauma, Grief, and Renewal Center, the Golden Willow Retreat. Dr. Wiard is a sought-out public speaker all over the nation. And what he does, he discusses organizational change initiatives, emotional healing from loss, spirituality, emotional sobriety, as well as issues pertaining to addiction, recovery. This man, he does it all. He's an author. He and I actually just co-written along with our friend David Silva. I have to read it because it's a long book, but we contributed to a chapter in the book, Innovations in Computational Intelligence, Big Data Analytics, and the Internet of Things. That was our book together. The one that he wrote, which is amazing, is Witnessing Ted, The Journey to Potential Through Grief and Loss. It's right here. You can pick it up. We'll talk about it later. But Ted, my man, thank you for joining. I love your smile, man. Thank you for joining.
Hey, Travis, so awesome to be here. I respect and love you so dearly and been able to hang out with you for 35 years in different realms and ways. And so really honored and humbled that you asked me to be on this.
Yeah, Ted. I could not think when I started the book writing process of Through the Storm, you know, a lot of the things we focus on for the beginning part of that book are military storms, things that people go through, hard things in military life. But the things that you've gone through, I would love for you to just dissect that with our listeners. So the question I have, first one, just to kick it off, and is just tell us, I know this story, but tell the listeners about the most significant storm in your life.
Thanks, Travis. And I know you warned me this was coming, but luckily I don't mind talking about it at all. And you did witness parts of it and even had your own secondary storms or pieces of that tributary that were such a riptide. So, besides just growing up and having our trials and tribulations, I had a 5-year storm that just really ripped my soul, tore me apart, dismantled me, and hopefully made me a better person in the long run. Not to put sugar on that storm, because that storm is very real. So within about a 5-year period, I almost died from something called cryptosporidiosis, which isn't as big of a thing now, but back then they didn't really know what that was. And right after that, I started moving through some really tough times. My brother died in a shipwreck up in Alaska. And when I first saw your new book and this whole piece, even though there's a buffalo on it, I thought of my brother in that storm where his ship flipped completely over and his body was the only body found. Soon after that, we found out my wife had cancer, sarcomatoid renal cell carcinoma. Most people had been living for about 7 weeks when diagnosed with that cancer. And she lived for 2 years. Also, when she was diagnosed, we had a 1 and a 3-year-old, Carrie and Amy, our daughters. And so all of a sudden, we had this storm come in of this word cancer. And so for the next 2 years, being a caregiver, supporting Leslie, my wife, in the process of that cancer and all the different deaths that go along within that process of relationships, of redefining, of being a caregiver and almost sort of a single dad for a 1 and 3 year old. And we did that really well. We teamed up well. The girls teamed up with us, and we were a solid family. And then when her body gave out 2 years later, it was time for her to go. And so I found myself as a single dad and with this now 5 and 3 year old, and the three of us started building our life and chugging along. And I would braid their hair and they'd get to school and the teachers would rebraid their hair, and these different pieces. But we were trying to build in the middle of a huge grief process the foundation. Their mama, my wife, since high school, well, she'd been my high school sweetheart. We got married when we were 21 and 20. We were so old. Um, so all of a sudden at 30, I'm finding myself in this world and trying to figure it out. And what am I? And we started to have a new cadence start to come in, and we're starting to have a rhythm. And with smiles came back along with tears, and just trying to do the world. And I was actually coaching the Taos Tigers in Albuquerque when all of a sudden I got a phone call, and there'd been a car crash, and my mother-in-law and my youngest Amy had died immediately, and my eldest Carrie died the next day. And so all of a sudden, from this world that had been dismantled and we started to rebuild, now every motivation I could ever think of for doing another day seemed to be gone. And I wanted to die. I wanted to go be with my family. And all the different supports and the community was great. And all those different parts, I was still in the midst of a million people, totally alone. I did not know who I was. There was no definition of me. Was I still a dad? Was I still a husband? Was I still a school teacher at the time I was teaching school? All these things. And Travis, I happen to know that you were there for the funeral, which had over 2,500 people. And even in the midst of thousands of people, I was completely alone in this isolatory, shocked place of being fully dismantled, and really no passion or movement to move forward. And so that was my storm of these pieces in the therapeutic world: complicated grief, or compounded trauma, or chronic trauma. There's plenty of different little titles, but those didn't even fit. It was just, how do I even find another breath? Because I didn't want to. The anguish was so high. So that was really the enormous storm that took me into a whole new path.
Ted, and like that storm, man, and I remember the funeral very, very clearly. I get emotional thinking about this, just hearing your story, knowing Carrie and Amy and you so well, and our families knowing each other. And I
Yeah.
remember walking up to you at the funeral, this almost teenage kid, and you had this big smile on your face, and you looked at me and said, "You dog," and you wrapped me in the biggest hug I've ever felt. And I thought, man, I was just like, how in the world can he be hugging me so tight after this is go after what just happened? So it's just like, man, that story of loss is so powerful. And when you hear it, I can't help but get emotional every time I hear that story. And I've heard it several times.
Yeah.
And the way you tell it is just so amazing. And so, but like that from the funeral, like listeners probably have the same question I do. Is like, man, how did you get through that storm and onto the other side of a new normal is a weird thing, but a new life?
Great question, and a lot of wonderment. And what I hope for the listeners of this and for everyone, to not put yourself into my story, but be able to hold the story as something to help along the way. Because we're not supposed to imagine our children dying, or watching our wife die through cancer while we're trying to raise a one. We're not supposed to do that. And so imagine that as a piece we don't have to do. And part of what helps start is people like you, dog. Because in that moment, as you were walking over towards me, you were just authentic, raw, I don't know what to do, which meant you did not come to fix me. You did not come, you were just that authentic, raw, young person who did not try to put on a mask on me or you. So those steps were the beginning of just, this is real. And somehow we have to hug one another and move through that. So those steps are the earliest. Over the next time period, first I had to find a reason to live. I had to rebuild a cadence because all my cadences were gone. And I don't know if this is true or not anymore, and I don't want to find out. But back then, credit cards, if you died, were cleared. And I had huge credit limits due to Leslie's cancer. And so I hit the world. And so ended up living a while in Maui with my mentor, Jean Maillet, from the Hotel St. Bernard in Taoski Valley, who's no longer here in the physical form. And he gave me that time to just be in a recovery room because I had been shattered. I had had many amputations with no time for recovery. And some of the vets I've worked with who've actually lost limbs, this process was very similar to the people I work with in that field. I had lost my limbs. I had had amputations called my wife and my daughters and my brother. And so he gave me this space just to be in and try to re-find myself. From there, as I started to try to come out of the recovery room, I ended up in New Zealand with some friends down there who did that same holding, but I had taken action called going to New Zealand. From there, I ended up in Australia. And so I was just running this credit card because I planned to die. And it's one of the reasons I don't know if that's still the rules or not, because I don't want that loose end out there of just having that piece, because I want to be responsible. I cruised around, ended up in Australia, then ended up down in Costa Rica and Peru. And what I started to see, because doors opened for me, Aboriginal people, all the different types of cultures, because of the story, would say, come do ceremony with us. And what I found was it did not matter if I was in Jamaica at a Christian religion type ceremony, or if I was way out in the outback with some Aboriginal people, ceremony was ceremony. It wasn't a certain color. It wasn't even a certain language. It was people coming together to commune and say there's something bigger than us. So I bumbled along into these different ceremonies, which kept me alive because there was something bigger than me and a connection, actually human connections. And I was trying so hard to cut myself away from these connections called suicide. And yet I kept bumbling into these groups that said, no, we are a collective. Somewhere in that process, as I was wanting to die, I checked myself into a treatment center for drugs and alcohol. Now, Travis, as you know, I didn't drink and I didn't use.
That's the funny part of this story.
and now that I've worked in many different treatment centers and even advised for them, it makes sense. I did fit all the categories. And who shows up at a treatment center and says, I want to come in? And when they say, well, are you drinking? And you say no. Well, are you using? You say no. It's assumed that you are minimizing and rationalizing and lying. And so come on in. But you know, deep down, and I think I've said this to you, and I mean it so deeply, I had lost my drug of choice called Carrie and Amy, and there was no dealer. And I would, at that point, have done anything for one more physical hit. I would have been willing to die, steal, cheat, anything to ease the craving of just one more hug from them. And so luckily, that format and those 30 days allowed me a chance to commune in something called recovery. I was recovering from my amputations that were my drugs of choice that I was dependent on for every decision and action. So from there, I got out and I decided, okay, that's good. And I decided I wasn't allowed to kill myself anymore. And I had to take that off the table because it wasn't serving me. But what's this God thing? And like a good April Fool's, and that date's important,
Yep.
April 1 birthday, I went to ministerial school because I had to figure out this God thing, a higher power of my understanding, so that these collectives were even collected in a bigger collective. So something bigger than me. And so those 3 years, I really had the chance to have introspection because I was no longer saying I can check out. And so in that, I came up with an understanding for myself of what my higher power is, God. And now there was something that held me because in that process, someone once had said, God is understanding. And I was very jaded at that moment. It's like, yeah, right. Like stealing my children and stealing my wife. But then she did something. She said, that means God is standing under. And when she did this move, for the first time, maybe since a tiny kid, I felt held. If we use our big doctor language, I had a phenomenological transformative moment. I even felt like I dropped 4 inches deeper into the seat for the first time I could trust my chair. And somatically, I actually felt that I dropped for the first time rather than being on guard. So in my world, I started to move out of being in a continuous, constant trauma response. And so in that understanding of my God, with God standing under me, I had the chance to realize now I can step out in the world. So all of a sudden I knew, for me, God didn't do, God understood. So the earth and all these things, fires and hurricanes, it's trying to get nature back to nature, which is called the dirt. But as I walked through my trials and tribulations, through my storms, all of a sudden I had something standing under me with understanding, and I would not be abandoned. So I met my wife at ministerial school. My grandmother would have been proud, my new wife, my present wife. And we actually, as you know, we got a 1987 beige RV, named it Shotgun Shirley, because every time we put gas in the car, in the RV, it would backfire 2 times on I-40. And we came back from North Carolina to Taos, and we started an emotional sanctuary focused on grief and loss and trauma, due to me realizing I hadn't found anything, and there really wasn't in all of North America, a retreat center for loss. And so instead of me wandering around Australia and New Zealand, I even got cat scratch fever, which means I was running around Australia with 104 temperature, which is not good for the brain. All of a sudden, there could be a place where people could go to a sanctuary to have the support needed. So in my mind, I was sick, I was crazy, I was broken, and that was forever. To all of a sudden this is a natural, normal healing process, just like an amputation, where then from there, I can get physical therapy, I can heal, I can get a prosthesis, and I can step back into the world. It doesn't mean I don't still have to do tune-ups, and there's not still irritations, and there's not still trauma that might slide in, but now I can step back into the world with an understanding. So that's kind of that's how I stepped out of the storm and also honored the storm.
The storm, it's just like you just said, nature has its way of recreating, and storms are meant to deliver the moisture necessary to recreate. And for you, you lost your brother to a shipwreck, lost your wife to cancer, and then lost your 2 daughters and your mother-in-law. All within how many years was that?
Richard died in 89. Leslie died in 93 after cancer in 91, and the girls died in 96.
Yeah. In less than a decade, that all
Yeah.
happened. And through your journey for healing, through your healing journey, through the fields of the Aborigines to everywhere that you went, you found healing, and most people out there, that would be enough. That would be like, okay, I found my healing. I can move on to whatever. But instead of keeping these things to yourself, you started Golden Willow Retreat. You started helping other people heal from things that you know all too well. And you stepped into you step into other people's storms. Like you come in
Yeah.
sideways on your buffalo, riding a buffalo into their herd, and you move through the storms with people because of what you've learned. So if you could just describe through all of that, what were some of the learnings that you took from that? We'll get doctoral. Some of the learnings. We're both esteemed learners. But what were some of the learnings that, like, some of the aha moments that still you carry to this day that could help somebody who's going through something like this, who's going through some kind of storm, whether it is loss, whether it's grief, whether it's, I mean, sometimes it could even be success. Whether these storms come, and like the topic is really it doesn't really matter. What would you tell somebody who is going through a storm, and for them to be able to get out on the other side better, more well equipped, and ready for the next storm? Because we all know, as soon as we are either in a storm, we're coming out of a storm, or we're getting ready to go into another storm. So what would you tell
You better
people
believe it.
that are going into that next storm?
I'm glad you said that. You said a piece there, even in success. It doesn't mean we still didn't go through a storm called change.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I both have a passion for leadership behaviors in the midst of change. That happens to be the title of my dissertation, but it's that same idea of it can also be in successes. So when we have these changes, and humbly and honorably, one of the things I learned is to be of service, a caregiver, I have to be invited into that storm. I'm trespassing if I blast into a storm of someone else's without an invitation. Now, there are interventions and stuff and that sort of thing, because that storm is wreaking havoc on other storms and becoming the storm. But the humble part is I don't have a right into that storm unless invited. And then somebody has given me an opening to stand with them and walk with them. I might have a flashlight and I get to say, Travis, here's a flashlight, and you might hit me over the head with it. You might use it as a shovel. You might turn it on and we find a little journey, and then we find that journey doesn't cover it. But in that humility of caregiving, I get to witness and walk with somebody. And on some days when they may not see their hope and their light, I might be able to hold that until they take it back. That's one of the biggest pieces I've really learned. I personally, and I'm seeing why as we're talking, I don't watch Storm Chasers because they weren't invited in. And they can get the heck beat out of them because they weren't invited in. And I'm not judging Storm Chasers, but there's something in my psyche goes, no, you weren't invited in there. Danger, danger, danger. And so to have the opportunity, just like you, we helped each other in a moment where you were walking towards me vulnerably as an awkward, just because we are, teen of this is so much bigger than me, and all of a sudden some of my innocence has been shattered, and so was I. And so in that moment of an embracement, we're not alone. And so that is the biggest piece. Now, I felt alone with over 2,000 people. That wasn't with purity of intent, but it wasn't that moment as you walked over and we were just in that place. The other piece I really wanted to mention, I see it as I see it in you, by the way. I see it in healthy leaders, and I don't care in this piece. I caringly don't care if they're transformational or transactional or hybrid. There's a saying in recovery of face everything and recover, or F everything and run.
Yeah.
But within that, also, I might face everything and realize I don't need to keep going forward. I might face that and realize, take my data, triangulate it, synthesize it, correlate it, and realize, oh, I don't need to go there. And so that's part of the process as well, as we're trying to open up the brain back into that prefrontal cortex of mindfulness and get out of survival. So I like that saying about fear. And a true leader is one who faces everything. These are the facts. And then with that, does discernment. Do we back up? Do we move forward? I love that you use the buffalo. I think I've told you when I was about 13, I had this awesome person who pretended I had a job. I mean, I thought I did, and he was old enough to realize, and he actually had a buffalo herd. And we went bouncing out into the fields one day, and I thought all the buffalo had died because it was just snow as far as I could see. And I was like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden, as the truck got closer, this 40 by 40 yard, maybe not that big, but something like that, the snow just started to rise. All the buffalo stood up. So somehow in that storm, they faced the storm and realized it was time to huddle up and take a nap.
Yeah.
Use each other's warmth to stay alive. And then guess what? Here comes the food truck and silly Ted. And so it was time to rise again. There's that discernment within all of this. And I get to see it as individuals, as families, as groups, as organizations. Where have we gone down to the depths and gleaned from that storm to have scars of wisdom so we can have better discernment to make a better future because we're being present? It just blows my mind watching this over and over again. And even through this thick head, it's like there's something here that in the depths of it all, the dark night of the soul, if we choose and connect and find brotherhood, sisterhood, all the different hoods, and bring them together, we can actually have scars of wisdom, not be an obsessive passion, which is historical, be in the present, which is harmonious passion, which also means now I allow neuroplasticity because I'm not just thinking about the past, I'm actually growing my brain, and from there manifest to our full potential because of the wisdom of the storm. So you can tell I care about that a little bit.
A little bit passionate about it, which is, man, I'm so glad I asked that question. No, your passion, it leaks from every orifice of you. Like your words, your face, it exudes from you. Your leadership does, your passion, your care, your love, all of that, you just exude that. And when I was walking through a terrible time, when I lost my mom, you gave me that flashlight, and I hit you over the head with it, and you gave it back to me. And I hit you over the head with it, and you gave it back to me. And what we unpacked was world changing for me. So one, I'm not sure if I ever properly thanked you for that time in my life where it's just it changed me. It changed me, and it changed me for the better. And and your book, it changed me for the better, because every time I read about the story, I understand that, you know what, no matter what we are going through, whatever storm, and this is very, very applicable to storms, that this too shall pass. Yeah. But we have to be active in that storm passing. And what you have done and what you continue to do is to be active for other people, for yourself, and that preventative maintenance, continuing to develop, continuing to learn, continuing to heal process. Because we're all, until we are no longer here, we are all learning, we're all healing, we're all continuing to grow. Otherwise we're not, which is terrible. But so I want to leave you with the last couple minutes just to talk about what you do at Golden Willow. And I want you to talk about where people can find that, how they can get a hold of this. What do you want people to have on the top of their minds as they finish listening to this?
Thank you for that. First of all, I want to say you always thanked me because you invited me into your storm.
Mm,
And that takes a lot of strength and vulnerability. I think humility is strength and bravery. And that is the definition of humility. And so for you to reach out a hand and invite me into that piece of your storm is actually the thank you. So thank you for that.
thank you.
Golden Willow Retreat is located in Arroyo Hondo, of course. That in Spanish is deep ditch. So if you're going to have a grief center, it better be in a deep ditch. But then it goes down to the river so we can flow through. And that's about 7 miles north of Taos, New Mexico. And it is an emotional healing sanctuary focused on grief and loss. So it's for people to come. And so families come from all over the world to have a place where they can be held. And in that, we have a multimodality program where you're getting counseling, spiritual care. In other words, we are supporting you in your spiritual path, not pushing anything down your world. Body work. Some people can't have touch due to whatever X, Y, and Z. So we also offer Reiki, energy work, yoga. And some people can't do yoga. So there's Tai Chi. Because a big part of it, there you go. A big part of it is permission, permission, permission. In loss, we have lost our autonomy. We think we don't have choice. And so part of it is starting to regain choice so we're not the walking dead, as I call it, where we've just given up and we're not doing, because it is an action place. And so that makes it sound like this big old holiday, but actually we call it an intensive because it is an intensive. And so somebody comes for 5 to 7 days, up to 2 weeks, to work with their different losses in their life and honor the loss that brought them there. Their loss might be, Travis, I just am not finding any energy to move forward. I don't see the blue in the bluebird. People come for many different types of losses, from retirement to promotion to not finishing their book. Whatever that is, people arrive. Many people, of course, because it was founded and started due to the death of a brother, a death of children, and the death of a spouse, many people come for those reasons because we're known for that. But it's not just that. We only allow 1 to 2 people at a time or one family. We've been doing more and more family work. In other words, it's all about that person. And then we build a program to help them walk through the same way you would in a recovery room, and then have the energy and the tools to step back out into the world. I call it, we wiggle and jiggle around, and we get to be the chrysalis as someone does their work, so then they can open up their wings and be the butterfly of transformation. So if you want to learn more, pull us up at goldenwillowretreat.org, goldenwillowretreat.org, or give us a call at 575-776-2024, 575-776-2024. We also do a lot of work with organizations. I happen to luckily get to go up to the Sutna Nation up in Canada by Banff and help them with addiction. They have a difficult time right now with suicidality. And so we also are willing to arrive. I even get to go to Washington, D.C. and work with some leaders in some different ways. And so we also want to reach out so that emotional healing from loss, or as like your book would say, emotional healing from a storm is possible, so we're wiser, stronger, and braver. So that's a little bit about Golden Willow Retreat, and I love it there. I'm so glad I had the chance. And I do want to, Travis, this one I think will hit you deeply. A lot of my passion comes from my daughters don't get to take another physical breath, and I get to breathe for them. And so that gives me the breath and passion with scars of wisdom, not gaping wounds. That is not refined fuel to show up and be of service and enjoy another day. and hang out with people like you.
Oh man, Ted. No, man. I'm so greatly appreciative of you, and more than what you do, but who you are and who you continue to be for everybody else. For those out there, go visit goldenwillowretreat.org. Also, pick Ted's book up, Witnessing Ted. You can find it on Amazon. And Ted, man, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for the vulnerability,
Uh,
the leadership that you exude every single day. Grateful for you. Thank you all for tuning in to this amazing episode of the Through the Storm podcast. Subscribe so you do not miss any more of this, because it's here to help. We're here to identify individuals who have gone through the worst of storms, unpack how they made it through that storm, and then pull out the wisdom that they got from those storms. So, Dr. Wiard, thank you so much for jumping on with me. Look for more from Ted and I. It's gonna come, and it's gonna come quick. So, thank you, listeners. Tune in next time. I will see you soon. Bye.